as people connect. Thank you all for joining us this morning. As a friendly reminder, please make sure that you have your camera off and that you are muted and that you put your name in and in Zoom as either your first name and last name or your first name and library. That way we can give you credit for being here today. And I am Kate Kite, the Continuing Education Coordinator for Illinois Heartland Library System, and I am very excited this morning to have Becky Spratford joining us. Becky is a librarian in Illinois specializing in serving patrons ages 13 and up. She trains library staff all over the world on how to match books with readers through the local public library. She runs the critically acclaimed RA training blog, RA for All, and writes for Booklist and a horror review column for Library Journal. Becky was a 24-year locally elected library trustee and a former board member for both Rails and ILA. Known for her work with horror readers, Becky is the author of 3 textbooks for library workers. Most recently, the Reader's Advisory Guide to Horror, 3rd edition, and the now out Why I Love Horror, which came out in September. She is on the Shirley Jackson Award Advisory Board and is a proud member of the Horror Writers Association, currently serving as the association's secretary and co-chair of their library committee. And you can follow Becky on Blue Sky at raforall.bluesky.social. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Becky. Thank you again for joining us this
Oh,
morning.
you're welcome, Kate. Before we get started with the slides, which you will get access to, I want everyone to find their chat, because although I'm going to be talking for a while, this is always like the, can Becky get through every genre in the time allotted, which I can, and there will be time for questions. There are some people that try to make me do it in an hour, and I think they do it just to see me like struggle. But here's the thing, you're going to be participating throughout. And in fact, you're going to be not only participating for fun for yourself, but you're going to be participating in a way that allows you to get to share your knowledge with each other. And if you participate, your colleagues' participation is going to help you as well. And I'm going to explain that. So this is calling Demystifying Genre for Adult and YA. And I have kept this crystal ball here forever, because I think people think that there's magic in when you meet a genre reader, especially if it's one you don't know. And here is the thing. I am going to make you realize that you can do and help any genre, any reader. And how I do that, first of all, very clear. I'm giving you a basic rundown of the major genres. I will not give you every single subgenre of each genre. That I'm going to give you resources for that. I'm trying to give you the rough sketch of what you can expect for each genre. And with that, the screen for this one has a lot of text, because each genre has its own slide with a whole bunch of books. They're both adult and YA, and all of them work for both readers. Everything there is recent, but not brand new, okay? So why is it not brand new? Because I want there to be time for us to see which books shake out. You're getting this at the end of 2025, which means none of the 2025 best books are on here. Those will get added when I start giving this talk in the spring next year. The point I'm doing here is I'm trying to make sure we understand where the genre is moving. You can't figure out trends by looking at right now's current books. We got to look back a little, and you'll see that. They're all, though, critically acclaimed. They've been on best lists. They're on novelist must-reads genre lists. They showed up in those places previously. And then I'm going to talk to you about current trends. And current trends are based on a lot of things. I do a year-end, all the trends in all of adult fiction. This year I'm doing it for PCI in February, but I've done it for I started doing it for PLA. I've done it for 10 years or more. I think actually I started in 2012 or 13, so more. And I go back and then look at those trends within the genres, and I will be doing that for this year in a little bit. Again, I have resources to keep you in basic genres shape. I also want you to know that I stand behind my own rules with my other trainings. And after I make this program, every time I do a diversity audit. So there are 167 titles in here. There's going to be more because you're going to add more, and we'll talk about that. And 150 of them could be categorized as a marginalized voice. And I try to make sure I have all sorts of different marginalization, and that's 69%. When I give my trainings with Robin about actively anti-racist readers advisory, people are always like, what should I do as my percentage? And we try not to give them a percentage, anyone. I always say the minimum has to be 30% because that's if you take all of just the racial marginalization in our country, you get to that, but that's not considering other things. So the point is here, I'm going to give you no excuse. There's no excuses to not diversify your services. Again, I am not reaching here. All of these titles, critically acclaimed, best list, bestsellers, all of those things. Okay. So let's talk about what genre fiction has been in 2025. First of all, genre is always a standard agreement, a way to organize and promote books to readers. It is a shorthand, but it changes. I think the really great example we'll talk to is when we get to psychological suspense, which is a genre I have watched changed, having started in 2000 to 2025. Like, I've seen it change completely what it means. You know, smaller versions would be like romantasy coming out of nowhere, right? What are the biggest trends in genre fiction? If you look at last year's talk that I gave, and it's still not that different, white women are ruling the bestseller list, especially with genre titles. Now, I talk about this a lot. One of the big trends in YA in a lot of the genres is these either biracial or multiracial casts of characters. If you look at all trends in reading, things that are popular with middle grade then become popular in YA and then become popular in adult. And why is that? It should make sense. Our middle grade readers become our YA readers, become our adult readers. So are we going to see this? I'm not sure. I think so. Genre blending has been a trend for a very long time. And it started really in literary fiction when they added speculative elements. But now we're getting a lot of it. So, for example, I read a book this year was like the Thursday Murder Club, but a dark fantasy. Okay, so there's lots of different things. Oh, by the way, anywhere you see a link, there's more from me on that topic. So you can look at that because you will be getting the slides. Okay, but here's the thing about what you have to understand. It's not what genres are being blended anymore. There was a time when I gave this talk when I went into a lot of detail about how the genres are blending. But what you need to understand as you help readers is that it's happening. So, you know, romantasy is obviously our biggest example, right? It brings in more readers, but it also is leading to a parallel rise in all genre fiction. And this has been really neat to see. So I see this in things like fantasy and romance and horror specifically. So, you know, we're blending those elements into each other or into other things. So we have the people who love fantasy who are finding romance, right? We have the people who love literary fiction and are finding horror because a lot of literary fiction is using horror elements. There's just a lot, and a lot of writers are coming to them. So it's a great way to see these things. And it's leading to more respect for genre fiction in general. Also, cozy everything. Cozy everything. Pick a genre, there's a cozy version of it, or something people are calling a cozy version of it. And then related is that senior age protagonists. Again, the Thursday Murder Club, and I mentioned that. I read another horror book this year that was it's a slasher set at a retirement home, right? So it's literally the Thursday Murder Club, but it's a slasher. It's very similar. So all these ideas, senior aged protagonists. Now, why is that happening? I have a lot of reasons, but the biggest is that as people have been aging and staying aware longer, they want to see themselves in fiction, just like, you know, anyone wants to see themselves in fiction. And seniors got mad that there were only, you know, either the hag or the like kindly grandmother, and are putting themselves in books. More popular and award-winning voices are in all genres, but there is also this blatant move toward resegregation, both in our national conversation, but I see it in like romantasy is very white, right? And the top books last year were all very white. So there's this idea that we need to be colorblind, or we need to stop propping up, and that is not good. Now, the other thing I need to tell you, and what we're going to do for the rest of this talk, is genre is one of the most effective tools you have to help readers. Why? Let's go back to the first point. It's a standard agreement, a way to organize and promote books to readers. You will not get everything, but you will get a shorthand. And that last bullet point goes back to the first and is what we're doing today. Now, how do I organize the genres? I organize the genres using this book, The Reader's Advisory Guide to Genre Fiction, 3rd edition. It is part of the series that I'm in, and full disclosure, I am in the acknowledgments and I helped with the horror section. This book is old at this point. The titles are not so helpful anymore, but how Joyce first organized fiction in the second edition was brand new. And in fact, back then we were teaching the Reader's Advisory course together at Dominican University when she did the second edition. And we tested this out on our students with their permission, teaching the genres in this way. Now we're going to go through all of them. What I need you to do while I'm talking is to look at this list. Okay. I'm going to explain how we're going to talk about it. I want you to right now notice the genres that you love. Okay. Which is probably easy, probably the first things you saw. We're going to have a slide for each genre as we go forward. Again, with a shorthand, not everything, not every exception, a shorthand. And I can only fit so many covers on the screen. You are going to go in and Kate's going to put the name of the genre as we go forward, suspense, in the slides. And then you're going to add your favorite authors. The idea of this is because we want you to be able to, one, share your love. It's really fun to take this webinar and start gushing about your favorite books. So we're going to create a list of everyone's favorite genre, or what people say are their favorite authors in the genres. So we're going to be working together to make that list. You're going to get the chat, and it's going to go be a resource for you, whether it's a resource for you to make displays or this second reason. Now I want you to look at the list and look at the genres that you're least familiar with, the ones that you're scared of helping those readers, the ones that you think you know nothing about. Those are the ones you're going to go back when you get the resources, and you're going to say, hey, Kate told me this one was great, or Ellen told me this one was great, or Leah told me this one was great. I'm going to go try one of those books to learn the genre. So I need everybody, though, to participate for it to work. So when it's your favorite, share, share, share. When it's your least favorite, listen. Okay. But let me talk about organizing this, because when Joyce and I used to teach the class, originally, you can imagine we had science fiction, fantasy, and horror together in one class because all of them are speculative. But here, they're in 3 different areas, right? Science fiction's in intellect, horror's in emotions, and fantasy's in a sense of place. Now I'm going to go over each of these in detail, both the umbrella category and the genres. But I want you to understand that they can be linked, both because they are speculative, but all of this is based on the main appeal, the most important thing for most people who read them. And I hope when you look at this, you realize, and I do with myself, the reason I like fantasy, historical fiction, and Westerns is the place, right? The reason I also like literary fiction, science fiction, psychological suspense, and mysteries is because there's work to do between the words. We're going to talk about that. And I promise you, by the time we get to romance, horror, gentle reads back to back to back, you are going to understand why genres that are so different can be put together. Okay. And that is sort of the turning point of this presentation. So first I'm going to talk about, and the reason they were crossed out, by the way, is because of things in the book. And we'll talk about that. Okay. Adrenaline genres. It used to be adventure, thriller, suspense, romantic suspense. And when the 3rd edition of the book came out, adventure, they were like, maybe not adventure anymore. Thriller and suspense kind of have adventure now, and we'll talk about that. And romantic suspense, in the last couple of years, I will have romantic suspense in the romance genre. But so much suspense has added romance, and I watched that happen. That was a trend I watched go up and down. So it's not so much its own in adrenaline. It's more of a subset of romance. And the ones that were more suspenseful are now considered suspense. Again, this blending of genres, romance in suspense, is kind of expected in many ways. And what they're called is the adrenaline genres. They're called this and doing this across the resources as well. Even a novelist, they're put together, thriller and suspense. I'm going to pick apart little differences for you. I'm feeling like I'm getting to the end of possibly doing this. We'll see next year what I do. And then the thriller awards are also, they don't combine them. They even add horror to that. These are not mystery, though. We need to really understand that. In fact, I have learned by running a crime fiction genre study that when you give mystery fans thriller and suspense, they are not happy. Why? Because as we'll talk about in mystery, there is no investigation you can follow with clues that would tell you how the story would come out. But true crime and true adventure are extremely popular nonfiction that work here. And true crime will also work with mystery. I know that's confusing, but it does. So we'll talk about that later. But I try to give you ideas of where nonfiction fits in as well. And true adventure and true crime are also extremely popular with teens. So we need to look at that. I mean, and again, it starts with middle grade, right? I Survived is true adventure. It is, it's historical fiction adventure, but it's based on true things. And kids love that. And those kids that started reading those are now teens. And now they're looking at it for more. And we already have true adventure in adult. They're called the adrenaline genres because pacing is the most important element here. They all have compressed time frames that make some kind of dire need to get things done. Also, I'm going to ruin a whole bunch of books for you today because if they're in genres, there are things we need to know that are going to happen. In adrenaline genres, they'll be very cinematic. They'll have generally resolved happy endings. By generally resolved, I mean, the villain might make it through, but the protagonists are able, know who it is and they just got away. And the protagonist is always safe. The protagonists do not die in thrillers and suspense because they keep going for another book. All right, and you have to figure out the preferences based on the Reader's Advisory conversation, but I need to be clear that there are people who consider both or the other. So Kate's going to put thriller in the chat. And then after she does that, you're going to add your favorite thriller authors. And I'm going to tell you, there's going to be authors you put in here that then show up on my suspense page, and that's okay. This is your version of the genre. So please start sharing your favorite authors now. Thrillers always move at a breakneck pace. Okay. They include extensive background and jargon, like a legal thriller, like at the top, John Grisham, right? Like a spy thriller by Daniel Silva. There's some kind of Shutter's a great example of details of being a crime scene photographer. These are all different examples. They are, again, cinematic, action-packed, tons of betrayal and conspiracy. Who can you trust? Who shouldn't you trust? The people you think you should trust, maybe you don't, and all of those things. Sympathetic protagonists, evil villains, very clear. Now, sometimes there's a twist. Somebody you thought you should trust is working for the evil villains, but we know who we're up against, right? John Grisham is a great example, right? He's a small town lawyer's vote fighting for, or small lawyers fighting against big things. Those are very important. They do have a gritty and menacing tone as a whole. We no longer have any lighter, less gritty thrillers like we used to many years ago. They're all very gritty in tone. But there is an emerging cozy options, like The Woman with the Old Knife, right? There's a great example. It's not cozy because it's still a thriller, but it is emerging, again, with senior protagonists. And the covers really help you do this. What I love is that the genre is finally getting more diversified. And I have paired titles that are read-alikes by diverse authors, right? By marginalized voices at the top. So if you like John Grisham, you can read Robin Jiggly. If you like Daniel Silva, you should read Alma Katsu. Why interests over professions, right? Because they're not working, they're not like doctors or lawyers or crime scene photographers, but there's a lot of larger interests that show up. Also, supernatural thrillers are very popular with teens, and that is a thing that adults like to read as well. And also issue-oriented, and then multiracial casts. Now, the hardest thing to differentiate is thriller from suspense. After this, it gets easy. Suspense is the genre that we're putting up on the screen next, Kate. Thank you. Ruth Ware. Yeah, that's good. Just looking at what people have. Courtney Summers we'll talk about later. Thank you, Kate. So suspense, lots of books have suspense. Lots of books. But a suspense novel is a book that's about everything that might happen. So a thriller, lots of things happen along the way. Think Dan Brown, right? It's all happening. S.A. Cosby is a good example too. But suspense is definitely just what might happen. And most of the story is about what might happen. The prologue sets the menacing atmosphere, always in suspense. So we get to somewhere in the middle of the story. This happens in other books as well. In fact, that suspense trope is ending up in a lot more genres, which is down at the bottom, but it works first in suspense, right? So you get put somewhere into the middle of the story where the tensions are very high, and then we pull back and we go and we see when things were going better, but we know that that's coming. This is also enhanced. They even ratcheted up more by having alternating protagonist and villain POVs. Also something that's being usurped and used in mystery and thriller now, and used to only be in suspense, even in psychological suspense, horror, all these things. but you get that alternating. Why does that work? Because you, the reader, know something's coming before the protagonist does, and that speeds it up and adds suspense, right? You're waiting for that to happen. It's a lot of waiting in suspense novels. Time frames also then, now, right? Or if it's not alternating time frame, the time frame is also an issue because there's like a countdown to something, right? But then and now is one of the most popular ways to do that. Okay, it doesn't follow the mystery rules, even when we have investigators. And this is where we sometimes have trouble. So people are like, I want to read this book. It has investigators, so you think it's a mystery, but it's not. So always ends with the showdown of good versus evil, but doesn't always end with justice. Okay. Cozy options have always been popular. The Mary Higgins Clark Award is a great example. Lori Raider Day also has won an Illinois author, has also won the Mary Higgins Clark Award. And then there's new authors. And I have examples again of diversifying your choices up top with authors you may like. And then romantic suspense can be part of suspense, and it can be part of romance. So in the middle here, I have some romantic suspense options. And that one is hard. You have to go back and forth with people and decide what they want. Do they want both in there? Then great. And YA romance and paranormal are like romance and suspense and paranormal or suspense are a given. So a lot of our trends, as I said, often start there. Okay, those are the ones that are the hardest to differentiate, and you have a lot of readers that cross them. Everything else is going to get way more specific and umbrella. So let's talk about this. Genres of the intellect. I kind of don't love this title because it means that these books are smart. That's not what this means. What this means is we have literary fiction and what we call realistic fiction in YA a lot of times, science fiction, psychological suspense, and mystery. These books, in a way, are puzzles. These are books that, well, they pose a quandary, right? But they also are books that, and this is why some people don't like them, right? And I have to be in the mood because I do love a lot of these genres. These are books that require work from the reader. They require that the reader think about things that aren't on the page. Some of them are very like literal, like, all right, or think, like in a literary fiction, stuff is left out, so you have to figure it out yourself. Or it's a mystery where you have to like, okay, they've given me all the clues, but they're not in the right order. The reader has to do work to enjoy these books to their fullest. It doesn't mean if you don't want to do work, you won't enjoy these books, but to get the full enjoyment out of them, that is really what the authors are trying to do. Pacing is also not a common factor anymore. Those other books, Adrenaline, it told us they were going to be extremely fast-paced. Pacing, we have every level of pacing in all of these books. So that's another area of genre or another area of appeal that you have to figure out, right? But it's also extremely easy to make connections with nonfiction with all of these. So literary fiction, Kate's going to put it into the slide or into the chat. Here's the thing I want to tell you about literary fiction, right? Actually, this is what I'll tell you about all the slides that are coming, because the other two are so similar. This is what you're going to get with every slide. You can use these talking points, because I feel like a lot of us are okay with our thriller and suspense readers. They're not really hard to help. They help themselves. They find authors they love. But this gets a little harder as we go forward. Every slide will have literal things you can use to ask questions. Words you can ask them, right? Do you like character center stories? Do you like when they wrestle with universal dilemmas? Okay. All right. So literary fiction, though, I make a very wide tent for literary fiction, as I think you should as well. It includes anything that's critically acclaimed, gets on a best list, even if it's a genre best list, you can consider that literary fiction. Is it an Andrew Carnegie Medal book? We just had the 6 finalists. I've been on that committee before. The 6 finalists announced, 3 and 3, fiction, nonfiction, but then every year we get between 40 and 45 books, right? That are titles that the librarians think that are good for a general reading audience. But here's the thing, any book discussion book. Why? And you're like, well, we're doing Jenna's book club. Okay, but if you can have a book discussion book, you can't discuss a book unless there's stuff to talk about that isn't on the page. That's what book discussions are, right? They're everything that happens. You're talking about all the things that aren't said. And anything you could do for a book discussion could be considered literary fiction. This opens up the tent and allows you to think about lots of different readers. I think a book like James last year really did that. And I think this year, I haven't seen the list yet of that LitHub does, which I will be posting on my blog, of the ultimate best list, where they take like the top 30 best lists and put them together. But There's a book that no surprise, people who know me are going to say is The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones is ending up on a lot of lists. It's ended up on Publishers Weekly as the best book of the year, not genre. It's ended up on best horror lists. It ended up on Kirkus as a best literary fiction. This is what I'm talking about literary fiction, right? And genre blending. We can open up the tent, we can open up the umbrella and make it bigger and wider and invite more people in. It's not a snooty place. It's just stories that are character-centered, complex, and multi-layered in some way. They're, like I said, they're going to wrestle with universal dilemmas and serious issues. Serious issue fiction is very popular, right? Especially with teens. Language matters in these books, whether it's in a literal way, like James, which is literally about the fact that, that in Huckleberry Finn, the slaves actually spoke very eloquently. They just hid how they spoke to the white people. Or if it's like Craft, where it's very experimental, Stories I Wrote for the Devil, which is a novel in stories where the writer had a relationship with the devil when she was young, and over the years wrote stories for him. And the stories themselves are experimental, but the idea of putting that all together in a novel is a great example. Also, other resources to use, the Tournament of Books done by the Morning News, which they're starting to have posts about toward the end of the year now because they're picking the titles, but they do it in March, which I love because it's like the last best list. They have the widest view possible of what makes something literary, and I think you should click there and check that. And it's a great place to find resources. Trends. Marginalized voices are extremely popular in literary fiction. It's as if the publishers are allowing it in literary, and sometimes takes longer other places. Genre influences here are very strong. I just mentioned a couple with, Craft definitely has a genre element to it. And short stories in general, Ghost Roots is a short story book, are very popular. It's a good way to find new voices. And debuts. There's an award for debuts. I always post it on my blog. This is where people find literary fiction authors. If you think about Tommy Orange, we all met Tommy Orange, which is also an experimentally told story, Wandering Stars, with There. And in YA, we have a lot of activism, mental health, and more identities are explored. And what do I mean by that? They're exploring neurodivergence and disability in ways that adult books are not. Maybe in romance, they're doing a really good job with that right now, the best, but it's in a way that is not, it's ubiquitous in YA. So we're going to see more of that identities explored. Okay, science fiction. I'm going to make a lot of people mad here. Kate will add science fiction to the chat. Okay. Some of you who love science fiction, myself included, this makes you mad, but I'm going to tell you because it's the truth. Science fiction posits future worlds and technologies which could exist, but do not yet. That's not the part that's going to make you mad. So science drives a speculative story, right? So, and let's go right to one of the trends, which I cannot deny because I got in a conversation with somebody about this the other day when I was at an event in Michigan when I was training them. Yes, there is. How do you differentiate science fiction and fantasy? Sometimes you can't, because science fiction and fantasy are starting to overlap. And in those cases, it's just the people, what do they mostly want, right? I think that like the Marrow Thieves, which is an enduring YA book that is great for adults, is a great example of one of the first books where that happened. So in the Marrow Thieves, we have a story, and the Fifth Season, obviously, by N.K. Jemisin, but where Native Americans, Indigenous people from First Nations in Canada, First Nations people are the only ones left that can dream. And so this is very, very vague telling you about it. Everyone else wants to sort of get whatever they have and get it in themselves so they can dream again. So it's science and it's fantasy, right? And the Fifth Season is obviously the first book that also did that for adults. Here's the part that's going to make people upset. Science fiction is about challenging and controversial ideas from the time they are written. Let me explain what that means and why you should be upset about that. 1984 was written for the people in the 1950s about totalitarianism in the 1950s. Just because we can see things that happened, like that's not the point of science fiction. Oh, it came true. Minority Report. I hear that a lot now, right? It was written, for the people of that time. Yes, but it's not for us. Now, can you still read it? Absolutely, yes. And people who are casual science fiction readers are going to love that, right? Oh, I'm reading this classic science fiction story and I can see how they got so much right. But that is not why science fiction people read. science fiction. So I need to be very clear with you there. Also, if you've noticed, I have no dead authors in this presentation. I will not put dead authors on the page because we know they're there, right? Like I mentioned Mary Higgins Clark because she has an award, not because I want you to read her books. Her books are still great for people to read, especially if they want those kind of more cozy suspense. But what I'm talking about is now people who love science fiction read it not to go back and see if they got it. They read it to talk about things that are important in their time, but cannot be. So I think Womb City is a really great example because it's got like a Minority Report vibe, and it also has a Handmaid's Tale vibe and a lot of other things. But it's now. It's set in Africa. It's now. I always love using Starter Villain, which looks like a silly science fiction book on its surface, but it's a terrifying story about the power that's put into the hands of billionaires and about technology and about how it's used and how governments, piggyback on corporate people with tons of money. And it's about a lot of scary things, but it's done really fun. And the talking cats are great. But anyway, he does a great job, John Scalzi, of giving you the have fun while you're reading it, but then make you really think after. And there's a ton of books here that do that. Again, you can keep going and reading Philip K. Dick. You can go read 1984. But when we're helping science fiction readers, they are more interested in how today's writers are bringing us to think about our current situation by pulling us out of our real world and showing us things that are terrifying. When you get pulled out of where you are, it's easier to look at where you are. Pacing's all over the map. Some are extremely fast-paced, like Starter Villain. Some are slower, like the Three Body Problem. Some are in giant series, like the 5th season. And it's hard versus soft. Three Body Problem versus Scalzi. There's a great example. Blake Crouch is a read-alike for Womb City, or Womb City people are a read-alike for Blake Crouch. He's got a great example of, normally if I say it's hard science fiction, it moves slower. Not so with Blake Crouch, right? Hard science fiction moves quickly. Trends, genre blends. Of course, we're starting to get romance into our science fiction, like we have in fantasy. Classic tropes, like I talked about with Womb City already. The science fiction fantasy overlap. Cozy and humor. So John Scalzi and Interstellar Mega Chief. There's even a lot of dark humor, right, in Murderbot. Teen fans read adult. And always adults read teen if it's really good. The Alex Award often reflects that, as it almost always has a high level of science fiction stories. All right, psychological suspense. I already mentioned this, Kate, put it in the chat. I already mentioned this is a genre that changed before my eyes. So when I started doing this, psychological suspense was Hannibal Lecter, right? It was serial killers. And it was either serial killers that were becoming sympathetic and we wanted to follow them like Hannibal Lecter, or it was people chasing serial killers. And it had a lot of psychologists trying to work out those serial killers. And it was very male. What does it happen now? It's almost all female. It is more about making you question everything, like yourself as well. So psychological suspense, I like to say, is all the appeal of horror, but with human monsters only. It produces, and that's why we're going to talk about, when we get to horror, there is some overlap. Sometimes there is not. Why? Because some people don't want there to be a supernatural reason, and then because it's less terrifying, so they read horror. And some people who read psychological suspense don't want only human monsters because they don't like to have fantasy in their books. And that's okay. This is why I'm telling you all these things, so you can figure that out with people. And there are people that will call these books horror, right? Like The Eyes Are the Best Part and Now You're One of Us are great examples of books that can be horror. And then like Reprieve, which is about the horror industry. It's about really intense full contact haunting experiences, like haunted house experiences. All right, so they produce a chill, but they also play with our minds. I think My Sister the Serial Killer is the perfect example of what we're talking about today. By the way, her new book is awesome, Cursed Daughters. I gave it a star in Library Journal. It's very different, but it's awesome. What does My Sister the Serial Killer do? It is very chilling, right? She is probably a victim of abuse from her father, but she's also helping her sister kill people. She's not outright asking her if she kills them, but she's cleaning up the mess after. But she's also a very normal nurse who works, right, in her hospital. It plays with your mind. The Eyes Are the Best Part is another great example. It's a female serial killer story, but you are like, oh, but is she doing it? Isn't she doing it? Is she right? It's like, what is going on? Is right in the center of it. It's claustrophobic, it's uneasy, there's potential disaster. None of these books make you feel good after you read them. You feel a little dirty after you've read them, you feel uncomfortable, and that is the point, right? I love the Frida McFadden covers, but The Housemaid is Watching is like a perfect example of what I'm talking about. So there's stalking and killing and human monsters, yes, but there's a lot of background and unreliable narrators, but not in a way that they're like tricking ya, in a way that you're like, look, they're straight up with you. Like, I am not somebody you should trust. Or you know from the start that, oh, I already figured out you're not somebody I should trust. They're not hiding it from you. They're not swapping it at the end. It's not Gone Girl anymore, right? With the switch. Someone got mad at me the other day for spoiling Gone Girl. I was like, my dudes, it is 10 years old. But I mean, there's a switch there. There's an actual physical, haha, got you. These are not that. These are, you kind of know from the start that you might not, there's stuff here you can't trust. Titles like One of Us Knows, right? And all of that. Okay. It is a literary style, though, with measured but escalating pace. A lot of details have to be paid attention to. A lot of it is, I'm giving you some of it. You have to say, like, figure out that I can't trust this. There are tons of twists and a lot less physical action. So it's a lot of monologuing and looking at things and seeing things. A really good way to get the pace moving up is a story like Reprieve, though, where we have like 4 different characters showing us sort of the same situation. So we get to see it from different perspectives. That's also very popular. Mood and character are over plot. So again, we had literary fictions and science fiction, which don't necessarily, they all use character, making you think, taking time out from the action to figure out what's going on. Same thing here. What are the trends? This is, again, my example of YA leading directly to a trend, and I watched this happen. And I have an article about it, but when did everything switch? I mentioned Gone Girl, fine, but what came before that? We Were Liars by E. Lockhart, and I was working at a library then doing teen, and you could watch, and there's an article about when that came out. You can watch this entire genre change from that moment. Maybe that wasn't the first book, but it was a book that turned the tide, both making it completely different stories, making it women focused, or groups of friends focused, whatever you want to say, but it changed. It changed from Hannibal Lecter to what it is now. And I think that's important, and really important that I've been looking at these trends for so long. I can see where they started. But again, it hits my point that we have to pay attention. Even if you only do adult, you have to pay attention to YA, because those readers who stick with it past middle grade are going to become our readers that are adult, and they're getting good books. I'm also starting to see a lot of young adult authors moving into adult, precisely to follow their readers. Kylie Lee Baker's a great example, who's a big teen author, but she wrote Bad Eater and Other Names for Corzang last year, which was an adult horror that was a huge hit. And she has one coming out in the spring called Japanese Gothic. Unfortunate name, because it is not like Mexican Gothic. It is its own story. It will get a star from me in Library Journal in January, and I have an interview with the author where I actually ask her about, the difference of writing for teens versus writing for adults, and fantasy versus horror. They're doing it on purpose, right? Okay. But the other trend is international. I have a couple international author here. One of my favorites always was Now You're One of Us. Look, I call it the Parasite effect. If you want to understand, and I'm not going to spoil Parasite if you haven't seen it, but if you want to understand what psychological suspense is now, our version of psychological suspense now started in Korea, and Now You're One of Us is a great example. What happened with Parasite effect? Well, the Parasite is the perfect example of what psychological suspense is now and what you can expect from it. And done in a way that the director understood, because also the writer understood exactly what he was doing. And why do I say that? I have one of my son's best friends is a film student at Savannah College of Art and Design. But back when this movie came out, when he was a teenager and he was winning teen awards for filmmaking, he said, this is why this movie is perfect. He said, the exact moment in the middle, in terms of time and in terms of actual lines of dialogue, is a moment when there's a character who rings a doorbell in the rain. And that is when the entire movie switches. So I'm not going to give anything away. But then it makes the first part more chilling. That is all I'm going to say. Female authors reign. and genre blending, and these are some of your best selling books. Okay, mystery. I'm going to do mystery, and then we're going to do romance back to back on purpose. Okay. Mystery is one of our most popular circulating genres. So Kate's going to put in mystery, and you're going to go wild and add all your titles. These are the books that among the ones we circulate the most and have the largest readership. What are mysteries at their most basic? Again, I am not going to be able to talk about every single subgenre and everything. They're a puzzle, usually a murder, and there's an investigation to solve it. These things have to be there, right? Puzzle, but there has to be murder. There has to be a crime that's committed right away. There has to be a puzzle. Then there has to be an investigation to solve it. Why does there have to be that? Because mystery readers, unlike science, suspense, and thriller, need that investigator to not only solve it, but the clues have to be there. And that is a requirement. And that has been there since Agatha Christie said that. So they are written with red herrings on purpose. They are written in ways to try to obscure what's going to happen, but everything you need to solve the mystery is in the book. So whether it is the Thursday Murder Club, which, has a group of sleuths working different times, or it's the God of the Woods, where we keep switching the perspective, but ultimately, we figure out who did it. And I'm actually not going to ruin that one, but that's one of the reasons we have usually a murder. And so the investigator is what people like to follow. People who read mysteries love characters when they read mysteries in a series, because they're following those characters. Even in a book like The God of the Woods, which was a big hit last year, which is just a one-off, Liz Moore goes through great lengths to develop every character. And that's how you see it's done, going back in time. So we get the sort of background story as to why they're acting the way they're acting. And it helps to cause some red herrings as well in that story. Okay, so the reader likes to try to solve the mystery. Now, I'm a huge mystery reader on audio. I have read every Thursday Murder Club. I like the How to Solve a Murder, Your Own Murder. I've read almost all of these on audio. Why do I like mystery on audio? Because I get too caught up in the details when I'm reading it that I'm trying to solve it, and I actually enjoy them more when I let the author show me where they go. And so when I listen, I actually enjoy it more. And that's me, and I've learned that. And my Libby is always filled with mysteries. Okay, they're often framed by authentic settings and are intriguing background details, right? So like How to Solve Your Own Murder, she's going to the small town, and she's going to find out about her family history and solve the murder. The Thursday Murder Club is a perfect example of this, right? We are learning about these people in a nursing home. We're learning about the characters. We're learning about their previous jobs and how it helps them solve their mysteries. And each one goes into a very specific industry as well. The Widows of Maribel Hill shows us both the historical, that's extremely popular, but also learning about being a lawyer in 1920s India, and being a woman lawyer, so she can go talk to those people, and all of the, because women can't be alone. There's lots of details, right? And the Gods of the Woods, which is the God of the Woods, which is historical. Okay, pacing always builds in a mystery. You know this. It starts with something, a murder, and then we go back and we solve it. And that is important. So we know it's there, but mystery readers want all of those details. Okay, trends. I said subgenres of subgenres of subgenres. You can go to Stop You're Killing Me, which is a link there, and you literally find a mystery for your life interest. Marginalized voices are big, and especially like I talked about, like older protagonists, seeing mysteries from different places. Like the Broken Places series is like the Sarah Paretsky, only with a Chicago area, with a Black PI who goes into all the neighborhoods in Chicago and the Chicagoland area, and it's very much based on like who's living there and the different people. The cozy has evolved. I mean, the Thursday Murder Club is a perfect example. We're going to talk about this when we get to Gentle Reads. But like the Thursday Murder Club, again, I'm not going to spoil it, but those of you who read it know that there are a lot of older people dealing with their own mortality in different ways. Let me put it that way. And some of them are violent. So it's not cozy. And it's, some people are like, it's a mystery. How can you say it's cozy? And like the Vera Wong's a great example of that, right? Humor and cozy, but it's evolving. It's becoming serious. And I think that's happening though in regular Gentle Reach, which we're going to talk about. True crime and true crime podcasts. Like true crime podcasts have brought people to true crime, but then you know, a lot of true crime is a little too salacious or older stories for some of our true crime readers. And so they found mystery. And that is, the podcasts are driving people to mystery. And in fact, a really great way to see that crossover is an older book I have here, but I keep it here, Sadie. And it's a YA book, but it's great for adults because it's a mystery book about a fake true crime podcast. So therefore the true crime didn't happen. It's a lot of layers, right? And also, don't forget that classics still matter in a lot of ways. One of the things I love to say about YA and middle grade mystery is that they are just as sophisticated. I love the Agathas as a great example because a lot of teens read Agatha Christie. The Agathas is a great mystery that makes an homage to Agatha Christie. But YA and middle grade are very sophisticated mysteries. When we have them for middle grade and YA, the mystery hasn't been dumbed down. It's just the violence has, right? And the danger in which the people are put in that are solving it. But it's not, they're very good, sophisticated mysteries. Also, mysteries are great for teens because they love a sense of justice, and mysteries always end with justice. You may not see the person go to jail, but you know that justice has been served. Or if it's like the Thursday Murder Club, somebody who goes to jail ends up being one of the pack of them. Again, not spoiling too much. All right, genres of the emotion. This is where I said when we were going to get here that you were going to be ready to understand what I'm doing. I'm going to do romance, horror, gentle reads back to back to back, and then throw in relationship fiction. But here's the thing. Every single one of these books will not work if they don't make you feel real feelings. I kind of think this is magic, right? I love this about fiction. Authors just take letters, put them together in words, they make paragraphs that turn into stories that are literally completely fabricated in their brains, and yet you could fall in love, or you could be so scared that you have to go put the book in the freezer, or, you know, all of these emotions. You can just have this heartwarmingness that can take even the worst day and make it better. All of these books require you feel different emotions, but feel emotions. So these are all going to be extremely character-centered stories because you have to get connected to a character to feel those emotions. But also I need you to, and they're going to be sympathetic, right? So you're not going to have that twist where like your main character is actually a villain. You're just not going to have that because it wouldn't work in these stories. There's also a liberal use of adjectives and colloquial language. So I say this because there will be details about sex and gore and violence in romance, the sex and the gore and violence in horror. And readers are okay with that, the level of which is they set for themselves. But people who don't read, for example, horror, they're like, oh, there's so much blood. I'm like, yes, but that is there for a reason. And like, oh, I could smell this book, like the gross descriptions of smell. That's a winner, right, for a horror reader. Again, there's also easy overlaps that we're going to talk about as well. All right, romance. And I do this with help from Robin Bradford, who's one of my presenting partners, but also she wrote the romance book and I wrote the horror book. So again, one of our biggest areas. And I'm actually going to ask her to help me update all of these for next year. But the definition is it must have a central love story and an emotionally satisfying and optimistic ending. Okay. We don't end, that's another big change. We don't end with a wedding always anymore. Okay. It used to be, oh, it ends with a happily ever after or a happy for now. The love story must be the central thing. Again, this is why some people love romantasy or don't love romantasy. It depends on their opinion and whether they come from fantasy or romance. I would argue that most of my romantasy readers that I'm working with are coming from fantasy. And so that is why they're okay with a lot of the romance, which is why we can make some of those older books work for them. But again, the love story must be in the center, and there must be an emotionally satisfying and optimistic ending. Main characters need to recognize that they belong together in a romantic relationship. Remember, when we talk about, I notice I didn't say a man and a woman. Notice I didn't say two people. We have erotica with more than two partners. That is popular. Okay. That's where we get the happy for now. It is not boy meets girl. It is people recognize they belong together in a romantic relationship. And that needs to be the conclusion, that they come to that reconciliation. Now, I'm going to stop right here for a second and move off script a little, because this is where romance readers get a lot of haters. And I know a lot of you are adding some of your favorite romance authors here. And these are some of our best-selling books. I mean, Emily Henry's on the top selling books of the year every single year. These are not things we should just not worry about. It's only certain people. But here's the thing, this is why romance gets hate. I just told you how every romance book ends. There's a central love story, has an optimistic ending. They recognize they belong together. So people are like, well, if you know how it's going to end, that makes the book, lesser. It's absolutely not. In fact, those books, in my opinion, two things. I'm going to talk about the authors and I'm going to talk about the readers. For the authors, if you can rise above and make a story that readers love when they know the ending, because here's the thing, going to the readers are reading romance because they know what they're going to get at the end. These are the people that read the ending first, right? These are the people that know they want to have a happy ending when they get out of it, and they're reading for that. And you know what? In this world, life is short and it's a dumpster fire. Like, you want a happy ending, go for it. Like, find books that are going to have that. I love that about reads. Those are the readers we want to talk to about why they like to read books they like to read, because they are reading for everything in the middle. So when it's not the ending, they're not reading for the plot, they're reading for everything else. So when you want to have a reader's advisory conversation and practice your skills, romance readers are the people to talk to, because they are very in tune with why they like to read what they like to read. And the authors know this as well. And the ones that do it well have to work really hard. And I applaud them because they're putting out some great books of a range of authors. Robin and I just talked about this the other day when I was in Seattle and we were having dinner together. She always is like, I always laugh when we were talking about horror. It was me and her and Sadie Hartman, and Sadie was mentioning a slow burn horror, and Robin laughed and she's like, I always bring this up. When I hear slow burn for anything but romance, I get confused. And that is important to know. Fast paced and slow burn are used in romance more about the romance specifically. They can apply to the narrative's pacing in general, but they really, when you use those words in a romance, they're more about the romance. Is it a fast-paced romance or is it a slow burn romance? You can have a romance that the romance is a slow burn, but the book moves really quickly. I hope that's clear. Okay. These stories, and I already said this, draw readers in to participate in the story. This doesn't work. It's emotions, right? If you can't see yourself in the story or participate or root for something, it's not working. Look, we all know how many of us, probably almost all of us, started reading our mom or it was my grandma's, paperback romances because they were around. Teens read adult. Also, almost every teen book has some kind of romance in it, so they're used to romance. But the teens are finding these adult books. Consider frames and themes, but don't let them control you. So we'll have things like like there's a baseball one. So sports is a frame, right? Some people like any sports romance. Some people want only a specific sport romance. Some people want, I'll read it even though they don't love it. But themes are the real big thing, right? So when you go on Novelist, you go other places. I have other resources there for you as well. Smart Bitches Who Love Trashy Books is a great resource for romance, because they talk very honestly about what's good and bad about romance. And I have a link to them somewhere else too. They, I think it's on the handout, but like There's Only One Bed or Fake Dating or whatever it is, right? These are just two examples. I've talked to Robin about this a lot. She's like, I hate There's Only One Bed, but there are some books I love that use the only one bed trope. So there are some people who tell you, I want friends, enemies to lovers. And you can find those with the resources. It's not hard. I have multiple resources that you can use. But my favorite one that's in my regular talk, by the way, is if you really don't know how to match a book with a reader, just put in, so let's say enemies to lovers, romances, Reddit, read-alikes. Why do I do Reddit? Because then I'll get people, not AI. And for better or worse, those people on Reddit, take it with a grain of salt, but they talk about why they are recommending a book or not. And I love seeing real readers tell me what they like. Okay, so they'll say like, this one had enemies to lovers, but it had these other things I didn't love. So for example, covers are useless now for spice level. That's something else that has changed. Oh, I used to do a whole thing about covers. When erotica first came into libraries, I was like, oh, now you can tell, right? No, you can't. Some of these books with these cartoony covers are extremely spicy and some aren't, and I can't help you. Like, you use resources for that right now. Romance is everywhere. There's just a whole bunch. Those are articles about romance coming into other genres. But here's the thing, which I love about romance. There is a romance for every identity. Every identity. They do a really good job with disability, neurodivergence as well. Different types of pairings of people in terms of falling in love with each other. genders and number of partners, and just there's literally a romance for every identity. But here's the thing, right? All of them are read by everyone. I mean, when male romance first started, it was white heterosexual women who were reading it the most. Okay. So they're read by everyone. And this is our example to use, that people don't only need to see themselves in a story in order to read it. And again, I talked about it, authors and readers are always in a fight for legitimacy. Oh, horror. I just finished my time of year. Okay. This is my definition of horror. It says a lot about it. Horror is a story in which the author manipulates the reader's emotions by introducing situations in which unexplainable phenomena and unearthly creatures threaten the protagonists and provoke terror in the reader. This is what horror does, right? It is how the book makes you feel over what happens. So atmosphere over plot. There has to have a dark atmosphere to start. So I'll take the last year's Bram Stoker award-winning novel, The Haunting of Velkwood by Gwendolyn Keist, who beat out Gabino Iglesias, Stephen Graham Jones, Paul Tremblay, and Josh Mallerman. And how does that have atmosphere over plot? We're starting right away. It's very X-Files. We're starting right away with a woman who's in her 40s, who is one of the only survivors of an experience that happened. This is not an urban legend. It happened. The whole world knows it happened. Deep in the suburbs in Ohio somewhere, there was an entire block in a community that disappeared behind a veil, and everyone in it is trapped and didn't get out, except for 3 girls who left the night before, the day before, to go back to college. And the trauma of her, but her going back in and seeing what happened. I mean, talk about an unsettling start, right? She's lived her whole life with this. It's ruined her, and now she's going to go back. That's atmosphere over plot. Horror starts uneasy and then builds dread and builds pacing. So they all move at a different pace, but they all start with something that's like, oh, this is upsetting. And then it might pull back, but it does set the tone, and then you move forward from there, and the pacing increases. Don't put down a horror book, and mystery is similar in this way, but don't put down a horror book for the last third, whatever that is. You're not going to be able to, so find yourself a place to sit and finish that last third. There are strong coming of age themes in horror, which is why teens also like it. And the teen titles at the bottom are some of the best, and adults read them as well. But there's always a coming of age underlying part of it, even if the characters are adults. I think Rachel Harrison does that really well. She features women in their late 20s or 30s who have something that has sort of stunted them from realizing their full adult potential. And over the course of the books, they find their strength by battling whatever it is that the supernatural is put in front of them. I need to make you clear that some people read it to explore darkness safely. Other people read it to soothe their anxieties and the horrors of their own life. So it goes both ways. There are open endings in a lot of horror. Maybe the situation ends, right? Like you've resolved the situation, but you're not sure what's going on from there. A horror movie is a really great example. There's an ending, but what are the consequences of that ending? And it keeps you alive. Okay, trends. No one is safe. Main characters will die. End of story. I'm not gonna go into that further, but you can't expect, like back in the old days, in like the 1980s and 90s, that the main character is going to live and be there to be the final girl to keep going. Doesn't always happen. There's a lot of genre blending. So I mentioned The Haunting of Velkwood has science fiction in it. Not just genre done, but with film, right? Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay is a book about a horror movie. It has the entire screenplay of said movie in it. It's about making movies. It's also, there's a scene in there that's like an example of the perfect jump scare, not telling you that it is, but it's very cinematic. But it's also, the entire written book is actually an audiobook. It's an audio recording, even if you read it in print. So there's a lot going on there. Classic tropes from new perspectives. So House of Bone and Rain is a really great example of a Puerto Rican retelling of Lovecraftian horror. I'll leave it at that. And vampires were very popular. I have So Thirsty there. They're still popular. I did just do an article about new trends, and I'll have an article in the lineup, which I write every year about the trends of the year. And right now, another trend is Gothic everything. So we'll talk about that. You can go to learn more about horror. You can read all of my reviews. You can see my book, Why I Love Horror, and you can follow Summer Scares for titles for all ages, because middle grade is some of my favorite horror. I'll give you a hot tip about a YA book from this year that's one of my favorite reads of the year. It is called The Best of All Worlds by Kenneth Opel, and it's also great for adults. It'll be on here next year for sure. Gentle Reads. Why do I have a question mark with Gentle Reads? Well, when Joyce and Neil did the third edition of the book, they took Gentle Reads out. But that was before we lived through a pandemic. It's just that Gentle Reads are not the Nicholas Sparks and Jennifer Shiverini type of Gentle Reads anymore, although those are still there. Okay. That is not what we have. We have this whole new world of Gentle Reads. And I'm going to go to the trends, because why are Gentle Reads so popular? Again, living through a pandemic, live in a world of a dumpster fire. It is escape from our turbulent present. Either you go to something worse, which is horror, which is why that is seeing a resurgence. That not the only reason. And or you go to something more soothing. I might throw my husband under the bus all the time. He found the Hallmark Network, and this is a perfect example, the Hallmark Channel, during Thanksgiving of 2020, when he was hospitalized with COVID. He is a doctor, so he got hospitalized with COVID for 4 or 5 days. And what could he do? Sit there and watch college football and Hallmark Channel. And he is obsessed with those stories. And for him, it is because his life as a family doctor is very trying, and running a hospice. He's surrounded by a lot of death and sadness and bad things happening to people. He loves to just sit down and watch that, or a really bad horror movie also, for the same reason. Okay, what are Gentle Reads today? Gentle Reads, it's Frederick Bachman. A Man Called Ove is the turning point of Gentle Reads. And people say to me, but Becky, the entire story, again, spoiling it, it's old. That's why I don't do new books. The entire story is predicated on the fact that the man, Ove, wants to kill himself. And the book is him learning or convincing himself not to, from community and all of these other things. Okay, so that is what we're talking about now. So they're not just happy, right? It's not just, oh, everything is great. There's serious things here. I think Under the Whispering Door is one of my favorites as well, because it's about death and dealing with death. But they are nostalgic and timeless and endearing. Okay, think about those terms. Those are the words we hear. They are not without bad things, but overall they are upbeat. And again, Under the Whispering Door by T.J. Klune is a perfect example. It is all about death, but it is extremely upbeat. And it's actually gives life. It is the book I give to people when they've had a loss, when they are ready for it. Now, still from those other stories that we used to have, multi-generational is very common. Also, small towns and second chances. Again, think a Hallmark movie. They have all of those things, but our books are thankfully a little bit less white than those. Okay, the thing I like to say about Gentle Reads is, and people who poo-poo them call them like unsophisticated. That is absolutely not true. They're uncomplicated. What are they uncomplicated by? The big city, the noise, the technology. Think about it. It's always, that's what Under the Whispering Door is about, right? We pull completely away. This guy is a horrible person and he dies, and he's untethered from everything that made his life he thought worth living. There's also usually no sex or violence or profanity. So that is something we know are not going to be in these books and still have a good story. It's not just Christian or cozy, although I do have one Christian cozy right there for you. Other genres have cozy too, like fantasy, right? Like obviously mystery. And then these are some of our books, by the way, that are the most popular. Frederick Bachman, Remarkably Bright Creatures. These are enduring stories that there's a reason they're good stories, but we can give them to wide audiences. Obviously, all of these are teen friendly. And I already talked about all of that. Okay. Now let's go talk about relationship fiction, which back when Joyce and I were teaching, we called it women's fiction. And it's really not women's fiction. I kept Hamnet on here because now it's going to be a TV show or a movie as a good example. What is relationship fiction? Here's the other thing, right? It used to be women's fiction, and then teens moved in because they love relationship fiction, right? About families, about the way their lives are and the people and the interactions between people. And they loved that in their books in YA. So now they move to adult. And then we get authors like Sally Rooney, who is called, the millennial author, right? She is the voice of the millennial author. But it's an intimate look into the lives of people outside of romance. There might be romance in there, but that's not the focus. There's a sympathetic link with the reader, like we talked about. It's all relationships considered, but women tend to be at the forefront. Although I have ones that not necessarily. The family chow is a whole family, right? Hamnet is about really the mother of Hamnet, who is the son of Shakespeare, and it's about their relationship as well. One of the best books that still I give to people is I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter. It's older now, but it's a great book for adults to read as well. This one's easy because memoirs are about relationships. Any memoir is relationship fiction. But Becky, it's not fiction. Is it? Memoirs are not considered 100. They're creative nonfiction. I'm going to say that there. But I love that like relationships like Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is one of the best books about a friendship I've ever read. The Vanishing Half is a complicated book about so many different relationships. These are just some examples for you. Again, we have seniors as well too. Celebrity book group choices are almost always relationship fiction. Kelly Jensen has essay compilations for teens that are nonfiction, but are really about relationships, either teens' relationships with their bodies, with their minds, with each other. They're really good to read. What are our trends? So many marginalized voices who are trying to share their story with you. Navigating different cultures is also a lot of the stories. The Vanishing Half is a great example of that. The Family Chow is another great example of that. Friendship or family relationships. I love like books like The Guncle, books that take family relationships, but not just parent and child. Huge crossover with gentle reads for sure, with really all of these genres, because I even have a horror crossover. It's the Bless Your Heart series by Lindy Ryan, which is about a family who runs a multi-generational family of women who run a funeral parlor, but it turns out they also are able to kill the demons that come back in some of the bodies and protect their community. Older adults as real people. In Bless Your Heart, we have that. In this, we have that, all of that. YA is not a genre, but so many stories are about family, relationships, friends, and finding yourself. And again, this genre used to be called women's fiction. It was basically just what happened after the happily ever after. That's what it was about. And that was the easiest way to explain it. Look at how much more complicated it is now, because our teen readers loved these stories, and we want to get them as they become adult readers. We need to have stories for them. All right, last section. Thank you for contributing. We're going to talk about what to do with all this knowledge we've learned, and I'm going to give you exercises to take with you when we're done, and there will be time for questions as well. So now we're doing genres with a sense of place: fantasy, historical fiction, and westerns. I love all of these genres, and it took me to teach years ago to realize I love them because I love a great frame. I just do. I especially love a book where the sense of place is so important. And in these books, frame is the most important element. None of these books work without the frame conceits that we have to talk about. Pacing is going to be more measured in general, but fans are not going to call it slow paced, right? Because when a fan opens up a book, historical fiction with a family tree, they're like, bring it on, right? They want all of that. Or they open up a new series. You're not reading The Wheel of Time for it to move fast, right? It's literally called The Wheel of Time, which already denotes it's going to move slowly. No one liked Tolkien for being fast, because he was fast paced. They read it for all the detail and to get immersed in the world. Nonfiction is easy. The place or history specific are easy places to go in. Also, narrative nonfiction is a really great place to take any of these readers, right? Any narrative nonfiction. So from Mary Roach, which is more about science, to, well, like Everything is Tuberculosis is a great example, right? One of the big books of the year this year by John Green. Why? Because it's narrative nonfiction about tuberculosis, but it's really about everything else as well. Okay, let's talk about it. Fantasy is, we talked about science fiction being about our world, but putting science we can't see to make us think. But in fantasy, magic is key. Creating a world of magic is what we need to worry about, right? It's all about the world building, and magic is involved in that world building. These are not things that spring up out of things we can say with scientific knowledge happened. Now, themes are almost always good versus evil. Now, is it purely the white hats and the black hats right now still? No, there are shades of gray in there. The world is not binary, right? Who is good and who is bad, and how good are they? And there's a lot to be said in there. Again, they often come in series. They're big books that require a methodical pace, but some of them do not. Like one of my favorite fantasies from the last couple of years is When the Angels Left the Old Country, which is a YA book that won like every possible award the year it was out from the ALA. And also Chlorine is an adult book that was for adults that I loved, and it's an Alex Award winning book. I think it's a little bit more YA than adult. I think it's that good crossover, but it's about a young woman who tells you at the beginning of the book that I am now a mermaid and hate people, but here's how I got there. Whether or not that happened is up to you, but and it moves pretty quickly. So often series big, I said that language and tone are all over the map. Some are going to be very colloquial, some are going to be a lot more infused with maybe the culture or the language, or they're going to literally be about language, like Babel, which was a huge popular book. I have a post that's getting older with diverse Game of Thrones read-alikes, and some of those books are on here, like Jade City, The City of Brass, Trail of Lightning. There's a lot of good examples there that you can find to get you started to find crossover for those big series. Again, here's my example of fantasy and science fiction overlapping, Gideon the Ninth. Trends for all age levels are romantasy and cozy. Done. Romantasy and cozy. Epic fantasy from a non-Western point of view. But I want to remind you that romantasy is still very white. We need to understand that. And then retellings in science fiction and fantasy are also popular. And these are some of those. Retellings and then science fiction and fantasy. And, we have the cozy and the romantasy up here. These are two of those. So lots of examples, again, a range of examples. What Moves the Dead is a retelling, for example. And there's our friends, the Legends and Lattes for cozy. Okay, historical fiction. Oh, I'm also going to make people mad. Historical fiction is set in the past, before the author's lifetime and experience. 25 years is a guideline. Pride and Prejudice is not historical fiction. It's not. End of discussion. Why is Becky? What are you telling me? That's like my best example of historical fiction. If someone calls Pride and Prejudice historical fiction, do not fight with them. However, again, it is set in the past before the author's lifetime. Pride and Prejudice was written by Jane Austen about the time in which she lived, and is a critique of the time in which she lived, and is the beginning of our current understanding of romance now that we read. But it is set in a past, written in the past. Again, do not argue with the person in front of you, but what I am talking about here is historical fiction. This is people who are using secondary knowledge, not first-hand knowledge, to tell a story. So it's got respect for accuracy and detail, but it's got that 2020 is hindsight look at it. And that's a really big difference, right? Now, it turns out Jane Austen was right about a lot of things in her society. However, when we have a book like Vampires of El Norte, which is really Pride and Prejudice, set in this space where America and Mexico have changed hands multiple times at the end of the 19th century, and is about that sort of fight between it with that love story that's basically Pride and Prejudice in between. It's literally Pride and Prejudice, but there's some vampires. Multiple people have said to me, Becky, the Hacienda was really, really like a horror novel, and I didn't love Vampires of El Norte. And I'm like, oh, that's because it's Pride and Prejudice and there has some vampires. And they're like, yes, that's exactly it. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a different story, right? Isabel Cañas is writing about her, and she talks about it in the author's note. She has a PhD in history. She's talking about that time when those spaces kept overlapping and what it was like to live during that time, and the Spanish and the Americans and the different people within the Mexican Mexicans, the Spanish Mexicans, that all this, different things fighting and what that was like. It also happens to have vampires. Okay, so there's a respect for accuracy and detail. Enhances readers' knowledge of the past. I learned a lot about that time in American history. Pachinko by Min Jin Lee is one of my all-time favorite books. Why? Well, I loved it was character-centered and very place-specific. It is a retelling of the 20th century history, basically, but through Korean immigrants to Japan. And it's one of those books with a big old chart of who is who, right? A family tree. I love this book. I love everything it taught me. It was definitely measured pace. It's a doorstopper. I listened to it. It brought history to life for me and taught me things I didn't know. Okay. Pace can be moderate like that with lots of details, but still compelling stories, or it can be a little bit quicker. Kristen Hanna is famous and selling tons of books because she's able to tell stories quickly. I wrote a whole thing about how, about World War II fatigue, and about even Kristen Hanna is writing about Vietnam now. The non-Western perspective in general is extremely popular. And there's a bunch of examples there. Dual narratives, right? Like telling the story from different time periods and different perspectives. Homegoing is a perfect example of that. Forgotten figures and places, also in nonfiction. So The Vampires of El Norte is a great example. It's a forgotten part of our history here in America. And it's really important. Older narrators, we talked about that a lot already. The Lying Women of Tehran is a great example. World War II fatigue. I mean, I think it might be there, but I don't think so, because I keep hearing people read about World War II. The civil rights movement. Okay, a little hard truth here. Civil rights movement is historical fiction for adults, and that's just, and Vietnam is historical fiction for adults. I was born after the Vietnam War ended. I am 50 years old. Like, it ended a few months before I was born. It's historical, okay? The 80s and even the 90s are historical fiction. The 80s are historical fiction for a lot of adults. The 80s are historical fiction for my sister. She was born in 1982, and by the time she was old enough to remember anything, it was not the 80s anymore, right? But this is historical fiction, so we need to be clear about that. It's not just, set far, far in the past. I have a link from a couple years ago of the best historical fiction of the last 10 years from Book Riot. And then there's this argument that I've been making this year, that is historical fiction so popular because all of it can be considered cozy. And why do I say that? Because we know how it ended. So even when you read a book about Vietnam, yes, Vietnam was very complicated and horrific and caused a lot of problems. We know that already. Like, it's not a surprise. So does that make it cozy? It's something to think about. Because cozy, a lot of people want to know that they're gonna know how something's gonna end, so that they're not surprised. So that's an argument I like to make, and I've been playing with that. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that's why, especially with Kristen Hanna's books. I've really tried to look at why is Kristen Hanna so popular, and that is one of the reasons. Okay, a Western. A Western is an example of a broadened genre definition that has brought in more voices. So it's the West as a place, not a constrained time period. Because when I started teaching about genre, I would say things like a Western, let's take Little Century as an example. A Western is set anytime between the end of the Civil War and the beginning of the 20th century. And that just isn't the case anymore. And it's because the people in the Western Writers of America decided to broaden their tent and invite more people in. And the West as a place, oops, I forgot to take her out. I'm so sorry. She did die this year. I'll take her out. But that's a great book, News of the World. The West as a place, not a constrained time period. So these books are rich in landscape descriptions. They're rich in mythical heroes and historical characters. Or, like The Hunger is a great example, it uses real historical characters. The West, a translation, is a National Book Award winning poetry collection that's actually about the Transcontinental Railroad, and it was done, state poet of Utah is Paisley Ricktal. I've met Paisley, National Book Award winning or nominated last year, also Pulitzer Prize nominated. And it's a collection, it's multimedia, it's a collection of essays or of poems and other things that link to historical documents about the making of the West through the railroad. And it's very much about the landscape and the descriptions with real characters too. But all Westerns, going back to thriller, are kind of similar to thriller in that they put their protagonists in a morality play. So that somebody's got to come in, bring justice, and restore order. That's very common. Even in something like the Buffalo Hunter, where we're not sure who is good and evil. And there is this idea of how are we restoring order and who gets to decide what order is, and the horror of manifest destiny, which is a whole other thing. They all have a nostalgic tone, and they use colorful but sparse language. Again, I think News of the World and the Buffalo Hunter show that really, really well. Trends making a huge comeback. I mean, Buffalo Hunter is one of the biggest books of the year. It's a Western, it's historical, it's a vampire novel. Like, it's literary fiction. It's about, the true horror of manifest destiny when you are a Native person. There's so many things. So really, really important to think about that. Women also telling the story of Westerns have changed how much. There's a lot of women on here. It didn't used to be this many women. It's almost all women. One of my favorite, it's also perennially popular. Look at Nope, the movie, which is still my favorite Jordan Peele movie, also about a sibling relationship, which is nice for relationship fiction. It's also a Western. It's also a science fiction horror movie. Yellowstone, really popular. The Oregon Trail is a popular game with my kids, their generation, Gen Z, really popular. Diverse Novels of the West, there's an article there, you can read more. It's also growing in YA, the idea of reading Westerns and this idea of retelling the true history of the West. Again, Buffalo Hunter Hunter and Four Treasures of the Sky, which was up for a bunch of awards the year it came out, best debut, is another one from the Chinese American experience. And the Hunger retelling, but adding horror. So. Okay, so if you have questions, now's the time to start putting them in. We have 10 minutes. I'm just going to go over the last few slides and some of the things that you can do after I leave you. Novelist has RA Toolbox, genre overviews with trends, authors, and start with titles. That is a great place to find the current titles. They're updating them all the time. Don't forget about the writers associations for each genre. Who knows more about the genre than the people writing it? No one. They're using what the genre has to tell their stories. Again, it's not a bad thing that people use genre. It's kind of fun. It gives them a way to sort of frame a story as an author and then make it your own from there. They also give out a lot of awards, each Writers Association, and they have their own resources and publications, and they want to work with libraries. The Rusa Codes reading lists and genre picks, the Rusa Codes reading list, which are genre picks, that's when I wait to update this after that comes out in January, to see what, that and a bunch of the awards lists to see really what from this year is getting traction. And when Rusa Codes releases theirs, they tend to make a general statement in there. They don't put it in writing, which makes me upset, but they do it in their live presentation. They talk about what the overall trends they saw were. And I love that because that's coming from librarians reading across genre. Then there's my link to my favorite free genre resources, a lot of things I mentioned during there and more. But I need you to know this. Don't sleep on Goodreads user-defined genres. What are these books that people love? Go to the tags, the shelves they put books on. Go look at that. It tells you how readers are reading a book. And it's a good way to use as a starting point when you talk to your readers. Okay, so I know at the beginning there were genres you felt like this about, but y'all shared a lot of books. My chat is done tallying them. There's so many, so that's great. I'm going to open it up when I'm done talking, but now I hope you feel like this, that you can understand, not love every genre, but I hope I gave you enough to get started understanding why the people who love those genres love those genres. I didn't get every reason, but I got some of the reasons, right? The key reasons. So what are the next steps? Okay, what I would love you to do, and I can't make you do it, but what I'd love you to do is to pick a genre you're unfamiliar with and explore it deeper. How are you going to explore it deeper? You are going to look, when you get the chat, at your fellow library workers in your area, right? Because all of you live and work in Southern Illinois, right? You can talk to each other by picking those books. You can pick some of the books I put on. You could go to Novelist and find some books. You can go to the Goodreads top picks right now for, they're in the first round of voting for the most popular books. Those are kind of really, really white, but I'm just letting you know it's a good place to go to see what readers like. Pick the genre you're unfamiliar with and explore it deeper. Go back to my slides, look at again those key points. Go use the resources I have for that genre. And then you're going to speed read them via Goodreads and Novelist, which I'm going to show you right now, okay? I have a sheet to help you. Find someone at work who loves them to discuss it more, or connect with somebody on here who loved a genre that was somebody who filled in a million things in one of the genres. Maybe try to contact them. You can use L2, which is an amazing resource, and log in and be like, oh, this was Jenny from blah, blah, blah library. Let me go see who she is. Let me shoot her an email. If you can't find people on L2, I'm sure you could shoot Kate an email and she could connect people. But I am going to provide you with a handout that's from Joyce Sarix's book that we used with students for many years to help you do this. This is how to speed read a book in 10 minutes. And what's really good is genre conventions, but that's not, you can do this. I now teach people how to do this between Goodreads and Novelist. If you use the reviews and the appeal factors, and you also go to Goodreads and read the 4-star and 2-star reviews, why people loved it and hate it, see what shelves they put it on. That's another talk I give. You can do that. You can speed read a book really well on between Novelist, Goodreads, and then add in a little Reddit for spice. You can figure it out. But what I really would love you to do is this. If you really want to work on that genre, find people who read in a genre you do not. Now, you've already identified people on this talk. You might also know somebody at work. But again, you've all shared and you've outed yourself as loving a genre on here. So find that person. Like I said, go on L2, look them up, ask Kate if you can be connected. And then you're going to ask them to pick 5 new books in that genre that they have really enjoyed. Or you can pick ones that I put up or ones that people suggested, and then find somebody at work to talk to about it. And then speed read them and discuss with each person who recommended the title, how well have you read them, but also talk about how well you got the genre. And that is the end. I have questions now or later, and I'm going to stop sharing because you're going to get these slides with my contact information. And I'm going to start peeking at the genre lists. Would you throw in space westerns? Okay, I'm starting at the bottom. I'm going to go here. The 80s are only 10 years ago, Leah. I wish the 80s were only 10 years ago. Speaking as someone who turned 50 this year. Would you throw in space westerns? Absolutely. So there's space horror, there's space westerns. Oh my gosh, I used to have, there's a Jonathan Lethem book that's like a perfect space western. Yes, the thing people like about westerns, they are enduring. As we see that Yellowstone is like one of the most popular shows on TV, right? They are enduring. And so when we add other genres to them, people from those other genres love them as well. Space westerns are some of my favorites. I'm going to keep going to look at things. If you have questions, though, now is the time. You can type them in. Oh, Holly Black, love her. And you can also turn on your microphone if you would like to ask your question. I don't mind that either. Just looking at people. Remarkably Bright Creatures, people loved it. A lot of people have mentioned it here too. One of the things I love about Remarkably Bright Creatures is how much it crosses so many. I could have put it in so many different genres here. But I love that there's been think pieces now about it. So are there any other questions? Yes, TJ Klune makes me sob as well. Catherine Newman is an author I'm going to be adding to this talk this year when I re-up it. Anybody else has questions? Oh, look, we got some good romance readers. Oh, good point, Leah. I'm going to go back to this. Romance can really surprise you with the spice level. This is very important. Even the same author varies from book to book. Use your resources between Novelist and Smart Bitches. Love trashy books. They'll be very honest about the spice level. Here's the thing, though. I find people who want only one spice level don't mind if their favorite author varies in spice level. But if they get a book and don't know the spice level and it's not what they wanted, they don't like it. Why is that? Again, people don't follow an algorithm. People are people. So they love an author, so they trust that author and they will read anything that author writes. There are so many people, like speaking about Stephen Graham Jones behind me, like who tell me they hate gore and horror but they love Stephen Graham Jones. And I'm like, what are you talking about? There is so much gore in all of his books. So I'm not really sure. I think it's because they love who they love and they don't, they give them more grace when they did it. Yes, Firefly. That's a great example of space westerns too. Anybody else with questions? I'm trying to go through and see what people wrote about. And if there aren't any more, I hope you go forth and you find people and authors or find genres and an author within it that you can at least understand better now, maybe why they're popular or why one of your readers really like them. And I'm not going to make any of you read books you don't want to read. Oh, I have more for horror romance. Okay, yeah, hang on. I don't want to make you read what you don't want to read, but you need to know how to help those people. Haley Piper, almost all her books are horror romance. Clay McLeod Chapman has a book coming out next year called Devil Inside, which is 100% horror romance. It depends how much romance you want. So I would say Isabel Cañas, the Vampires of El Norte, and the one that she had this year, The Possession of Alba Diaz, also horror romance. Alexis Henderson does horror romance as well. Alexis Henderson. Who else on the top of my list? Some people say Rachel Harrison's horror romance. I don't think so because there's no love in there. What about street lit? Street lit, always popular. So what is street lit? It depends. And that's the problem with street lit. It gets done as a genre. I hope that helps for horror romance. You can find more with those authors, by the way. Here's the problem with street lit. And I worked with it for years at my library. Street lit is a category of reading, but it's not one genre. Between the books, they're different genres, right? Some are more crime fiction, like suspense or thriller. Some are more romance, some are more romantic suspense. It's very hard. So street lit is one of those categories that it's its own category. And unfortunately, there are not enough stories of urban people. And erotica. A lot of erotica started as street lit. In fact, that's where street lit had erotica in libraries, and then some of those authors started writing romance, and now they're called romance. Oh, it's so frustrating. So what I want to say is, the for street lit, you have to work with those readers and then find the authors they like and look deeply at the appeal factors before you just give any street lit, because their readers are going to be very complicated and different. And I love saying that because some people are like, oh, they just like street lit. Let's just put out anything. They'll read anything. They are sophisticated readers. Trust me. I helped many of them for years. So I'm sorry I couldn't help more with that.
Excellent. Well, we are at 11:30 exactly, Becky. Thank you so much. As Becky mentioned repeatedly, I will be sending out the slides and the resources. It might not be till early next week, just to give you a heads up, but you will all receive those. And it's been great to see the chat and how engaged everyone has been. Thank you, Becky, so much for your time this morning. And now on our end, we're going to stop the recording for this section, take a quick turnaround of less than a minute, and come back for our quick Members Matter update.
Oh boy, have fun.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye, Becky.